Hey everyone, just going to start another drawing, and I'm going to start like I did the last time by preparing some collage materials, some of which are from papers that I've made myself. I've talked about this already in a couple of videos. You can see here, this is sort of spray paint with plant material as a resist, so just forming these kind of organic patterns on the page. And that's all I really want this for, is I want the kind of organic feel, and I want the kind of what the spray paint will naturally do, which is this cloudiness, this a bit of the soft flow between things, even when there's an edge, because of course these aren't really none of the materials being put down are straight. Even if it's a piece of paper being put down, I didn't tape those edges down or anything. So you can see even in the one sheet that I've picked off to the right hand side there that has some hard edges, even those have a blur to them, a fuzziness, a softness. And I quite like that about using this sort of material. There's also a bit of a texture to it. Some of these actually, especially that pink one, we actually had some problems with that particular can of spray paint, and it was going on kind of spattery and heavily, and so it's actually a little bit coarse. It's got like a texture to it, and actually I think I'm going to like that in terms of being able to draw on top of it. Anyway, sort of like you can see from previous videos, I'm actually just, some of these I'm cutting up are almost arbitrarily. It's not purely arbitrary because I'm using my brain and making decisions, but not all of this is being cut up to actually be used in the drawing I'm about to do. And again, if you haven't watched previous videos, I don't know what sort of drawing I'm going to do. So I'm just kind of preparing materials in order to have something to respond to, in a sense. I decided this time to take some of these materials, instead of using them as their shape, I'm going to just cut out some rough circle shapes. And I do this in a variety of ways. I've done this before. So in this case, I'm just using the circle template to get the sizes of them. The other ways I've done this is I do have a few actual circle punch templates that'll cut out quite a clean circle. I didn't really want that in this case. I wanted to make some circle forms, but I actually wanted to cut them out with scissors, because in the final product it still looks like a fairly clean circle. But I like the little bits of offness, I guess it gives. I like to be able to cut it freehand, and actually even make some choices while I'm cutting to not cut perfectly. In this case, also here, when I'm drawing on the circles that I'm going to cut out, I decided partway, because I've been doing a lot of semicircles recently, I thought I would actually even just pre-cut out a semicircle. Again, don't know where these are going to go at this point. I just know that I'm going to be cutting out those circles. And then just sort of looking through the bin I have here to the left, as you can tell, is really just it's a real grab bag. There's paper in there that's brand new, like dollar store paper. There's paper in there that's like maybe even 100-year-old kind of paper from various things. What I just actually tore in half there, those are probably 90, 100-year-old pieces of they're like check stubs. We have a number of kind of old paper ephemera collections like this that are interesting, often because of the writing on them, or sometimes they're just interesting. In this case, all I really wanted, and what I'm kind of doing there by kind of tiling them and taking a look at them, is I'm going to do this drawing I'm going to do is again in the ledger, and so it already has it already has a grid. It already has its own kind of matrix of rows and columns. But I like taking things like graph paper or even other paper like this that already has its own lines on top of it, and then applying that again on top of the thing. See, you can see what I'm doing there is putting them up against each other to see if maybe I want to make almost like a sheet within a sheet in a sense. That's the interesting thing about collage to me sometimes is that it's um, inevitably it's going to be a flat thing, a relatively flat thing on a single page, unless you're doing sort of more assemblage where there's a that seems to be the only real distinction between kind of collage and assemblage is really sort of the the volume of the final thing. So assemblage is assuming that your things are a little bit more 3D than on a flat surface kind of thing. I've done bits and pieces of that as well, and I may show some videos of some older work, or maybe if I decide to do something like that. Anyway, back to the point I was getting at was that there's something about collage, and I sorry I keep jumping from my topic here, but welcome to me. The everything I do, I kind of think of as drawings. Frankly, even when I was making music, I called those journals, but to me they were sort of like audio sketchbooks in a sense. And so um, I feel like collage is kind of like pages within a page in a sense, where and sometimes that's literal, where you're actually sort of you've got kind of rectangular forms within another rectangular form, and sometimes that's quite a bit more abstract, which is more often the case for me. I do work with somewhat rectangular forms semi frequently, but um, they they don't really they're not really pages unto themselves. They're kind of it's the flow between the shapes. Anyway, just something interesting that popped in my head that there's within collage. It's this interaction of static and kind of relatively two-dimensional forms within one bigger kind of rectangle, one bigger framing device. A lot of a lot of artwork in that is mostly in the concerned with, at least the final project is mostly kind of concerned with the with two dimensions. I know I'm sort of loosely saying that it's like artwork that is essentially going to end up being flat. A lot of that is often concerned with the frame that it sits within. Um, thinking of photography, thinking even of all forms of painting and drawing, they almost entirely sit within mostly almost all of them within rectangles. Occasionally I've done this too. I've done drawings within circular forms, that sort of thing. But a lot of what many artists throughout history have done is worked within the rectangle, whether that rectangle is a wall, a stretched canvas, a page, etc. So collage collage doesn't have to be within a strict form. My partner Gail does quite a bit of really beautiful paper collage that breaks out of its own form. It still kind of is contained within maybe the view you will see it. But anyway, just something that I'm rambling on about here as I get ready. Again, I've zoomed in on the ledger. We're on page 146, as you can see, and there's 148 pages in this ledger. So this is the third to last drawing in this big book. And I'll repeat while I'm off camera here. I'm picking some paints and getting a couple other things ready. So here comes some paint. I'm starting again. In this case, I used this in the last drawing. This fairly nice Prussian blue. That is one of the few. I don't use as many dark colors like that as frequently, I find, in these drawings. I've said in previous videos, a lot of the colors I use are more warmer in tone. They're oranges and pinks and yellows and often and sometimes very oranges or very pinks, like referring to neons or like really kind of reflective colors. But I do quite like this blue. And maybe it's because there's another recurring theme in my drawings is kind of the landscape and also the waterscape, I guess. And so I've done quite a few things that kind of resonate as like sort of sea and sky. Sometimes quite literally. I've done sea and sky drawings where I meant to depict sea and sky. But there's something about this kind of blue that feels very kind of deep ocean, kind of aquatic. And I guess I favor, in terms of blues, I favor this kind of blue and maybe like an aquamarine or even sometimes a teal. So they're kind of a counter to those warm colors. I don't go for blue colors that have red in them, like veering into kind of purple. That often, if at all. And strangely, actually, I will occasionally use. This is now a side about color, but I will occasionally use green. But I actually love the color green. When asked as a kid, my favorite color, I would vacillate between red and green. I think, very kid thing where you only kind of know the names of a few colors, and so I could now probably be a bit more specific. But so I really love green, but I don't tend to paint with green very often, and I guess when I do, the greens I pick are kind of two shades. One is a very blue green, and then the other is a very yellow green. I'm more into the kind of olive tones, or even maybe very much into a yellow, like a chartreuse, which is, Gayla and I have these running arguments about yellow versus green, like which is which when we see a color. I think she's probably usually right. I do. I have a strange thing with my vision, which I've never looked into, but if I close one eye and look at a color, and if I close the opposite eye and look at a color, I've one eye sees slightly. I don't know which is the more correct. Who knows? One eye sees cool colors, and one eye sees warm colors. It sees the same color, so it's not. I'm not colorblind in one eye or the other, but the like I say, the warmth, the kind of the hue, I guess, of the color switches from being cool to warm, cool to warm. I guess I should test here. It's my left eye is warm and my right eye is cool. It's a strange thing. I forget when I discovered that, but it was a bunch of years back, and I thought at first it was just sort of like the relative distance between two eyes and what I'm looking at, but it seems to be, in any case, there's just this difference that isn't really meaningful in terms of mixing colors or anything like that. I think because I'm looking at the colors with both eyes, I think it probably all comes out in the wash. But anyhow, I'll jump back into this. So there's the yellow that I've used here is a nice warm, but it's not actually one I normally go for. It's actually, I believe this is called like a raw sienna, but to me it's a really yellow. It doesn't have any of the kind of mustardy, browny kind of tone. I just put down way too much white paint there. It doesn't. Anyway, I quite like this color, but it's I don't know how true it is to, like, if someone was really going by the name, if they really wanted like a raw sienna like this, I think they'd be maybe disappointed. But anyway, it's a nice color regardless. So yeah, I found in this case that I put on this unfortunately large amount of white because I had put down that kind of very mushroomy gray initially, and I felt like there was too much of it. So I kind of wanted to get back to, despite the page in this case, the pages are very yellow. This is old paper. The paper itself is just a very low grade, kind of highly acidic paper. So it's got a lot of yellow in it for being old. But still, I think the white here kind of breaks back through that kind of mushroomy gray. And you're seeing here one thing I quite like about working kind of wet on wet when it turns out well for me is that I can pull off bits of the other color with some level of predictability, but I can also, because it's still wet, you saw me do it a little while before, like I can actually scrape off with a fairly wide tool like I was just using. I can scrape back down to almost the page surface. Obviously it's paper and I'm not going to get back to a clean piece of paper at this point. But if I want to incise or if I want to cut back through multiple layers of color, because it's still a little bit wet and it's got a little bit of play to it, I can do that. So at this point, I've a lot of the times when I'm putting down color, I like it as a starting point, especially like in this case, I know because I cut out those collage pieces. I don't always do collage. I guess I should make that clear. Like not every drawing in this book is a mixture of drawing and painting and collage. Some of them are purely, like most people would call some of them just purely paintings. But anyway, when I know that I want to do collaging with other paper material on top of this, on top of these sort of drawings, the paint that I put down is more about kind of defining these kind of zones and also creating, I think I've mentioned this every video so far, like creating a bit of emotion. And so this one has, I think this happens to me fairly often. It's probably even just my handedness. There's kind of a left right diagonal that goes through with that blue, and then I've got these kind of weighted areas. You see, like even though they're white, this sort of top right white area and the bottom left white area. They're blended. They're not solid, but they have a bit of weight. And then those kind of almost bursts, like kind of almost fiery bursts of that yellow on either side. Again, I think the whole thing right now reads to me as kind of landscape. It feels like it could be, this could be an aerial view. This could be a topographic kind of view of land masses and water, like islands and if you wanted to be literal, the white could literally be glacial or snow or something like that. But there's anyway, it isn't, like I say, sometimes it's intentional. Sometimes when I'm thinking of landscape when I'm doing these things, other times it just comes out that way. And I think it's like maybe there's something, maybe there is a word for this, I don't know, but there's a term, a relatively associated term, pareidolia, where you see faces in things that aren't faces. Maybe there's some sort of word. I should look this up for seeing landscape where there is no landscape, because it's a very, I guess, if you want to see landscape, if you want to see have a visual connection to land and geography, then you will see it. Just to interject myself, you see there where I was able to use this small palette knife and I can actually cut right through that white paint because it's still got enough play, and I was able to get in those those kind of rectangular, almost little square forms, just with the stroke of that palette knife. I did that. I thought there's maybe I was feeling like that top white area was too kind of heavy. Even though it's weird to think of white forms like that as heavy, because they're almost like, I guess you could also see those as clouds. Anyway, back to following along with what I'm doing. I'm also, you can see, doing little bits of both pencil and it's my good old dark Stabilo, all making marks, though, the kind of black marks. I haven't done a lot of that in this case. Sometimes I'll actually start these drawings just by making lots of scribbles that mostly get covered up. But in this case, I had that initial sense, like I picked that blue and I kind of knew that there's going to be this big wash of blue there. I didn't know what form it'll take. That's the interesting thing about working with the palette knife, is I can control the motion of the palette knife, but what's happening underneath that knife, it's acrylic paint, and so its tendency is to sort of glom up. It's plasticky. It doesn't have really a lot of smooth flow. You can make it more liquidy, but I actually don't want it that. I actually like that it's a little bit sticky, because when I make the strokes, some of it will stick to the page, some of it will stick more to the palette knife, and you get these interesting kind of edges and textures. Anyway, so now I'm on to the kind of more collage-y aspects of this, where I've picked a few of these elements. You saw me at the beginning kind of pulling these in, and now I'm making choices of whether I'm going to use them or not. You'll see this gets actually kind of comical in this way. I decided I wanted to use glue stick. This is the kind of, the purple is just, it's one of these glue sticks that it changes color. The purple fades. It's just so you know where you got the glue, basically. I'm very messy at this sort of stuff, but so I try to make sure that I got enough glue on there, but the comical part is that glue stick is basically almost done, and so I struggle for the rest of the video to get enough glue on things. Anyway, in this case, unlike the previous video where I was using acrylic matte medium as an adhesive to stick a lot of things down, I want to use the glue stick in this case because it changes the... I actually wanted the raw paper this time as the surface. Here I am with one of those one of the little kind of canceled check stubs, or kind of receipt. I guess it's more of a receipt, this one. Trying to figure out where I might want to use that those lines. And I've got all these parts here. I've got textures. I've got those, the circles being the most defined thing I've got. Trying to see if I actually ended up not liking the big size of that texture, and trying to see if ripping it in a few places would give me something more like a shard that I could work with. It's a less rectangular form. I think kind of responding to the one I put over on the right hand side there, that has that sort of ripped top taper where it goes to yellow. I liked that, and I was trying to see if I could pull in something similar with ripping. It's the other, like what I said about the palette knife, freeform ripping of paper you can control it because paper has a grain, but it's often interesting to just grab and rip regardless of the paper's grain, because then it'll rip poorly. Basically, if you rip paper against the grain, you won't get a straight rip. You'll get triangular pieces of paper, strange things. So in the end, from all that kind of ripping and tearing, I actually just used these, I pulled out these kind of like, they almost look like concrete or something like that. These sort of gray forms that have a little edge on them that's still the paper. These are again still just part of the spray paint things, but you can see they almost, I put them down, and if I went back and forth, you'd be able to see where they were, but they almost just feel like they were already there. Like they don't make a statement, but um, they fill in a space there that feels right. The one, especially the top left one there, that gray form kind of butts up against the square form where I carved out with the palette knife. All right, here's more futzing around with the glue stick. So I'm going to put down the first one of these circles here. I think I'm putting more glue on my fingers here than I'm on the paper, but anyway, it's all fine. I do get like I said, I'm pretty messy when I get through these things. I'm not getting paint all over the place or glue all over the place, but definitely my hands get pretty gunked up by the end of this. So yeah, I've got the pink here now. It reads almost like construction paper or something, but that's again both the yellow and the pink here. And the yellow is interesting because it's got that very like hazy yellow and orange mix. Those are both from spray paint on some pretty cheap kind of bond paper. It's actually gray paper, which makes for an interesting effect. It kind of tones the color down. I think if I had done the same thing on white, that yellow would have been a really glaring kind of, because it's actually quite a hard like fluorescent kind of yellow. But I actually like what happens to it. It turns a little bit green because the underlying paper is actually gray. Oh yeah, I pulled out, this is a kind of a shard I cut beforehand it's from just a set of bingo cards. And then I'm trying to figure out where I might put that. I'm realizing it's a little too big, so I'm going to maybe cut it down a little bit more. I also kept this, that's obviously the form that I cut the pink circles out of, because I wanted to see if it would make sense to pull that in somehow. It's interesting sometimes you can kind of play with because it's got the same circle cut out. Your eye almost imagines the rest of the circle. Where I end up putting it, that's kind of intentional, because I'm going to end up putting it around here, and you can see with the yellow circle to the left of it, you'll see better once it goes in place. Your eye, or I suppose your mind, can kind of supply the rest of the kind of ghost circles. I shouldn't talk about it until it's there, but it'll be there soon. All right, let's see if I get down so you can kind of see what I'm talking about. Maybe no one else gets this, but the intention here is that move your hand down. Okay. So the left yellow circle, and then my intention is almost to suggest that there's 3 circles in a row, even though there's only the one. Just that those kind of edges, you can kind of imagine with your mind the completion of those circles, and that's part of what I do in these drawings, is that there is something to the fact that while I certainly don't always obey the underlying matrix of the ledger pages, a lot of things do have kind of a balance, either of repetition or a balance of rough measurement between forms. You can see they're eyeballed, but the 3 circles top to bottom here so far are, they're not actually the same distance apart. I can see that even looking here, like they're a little closer, but there's a there's an intention in their distance, and they're also intentionally in a semi-straight vertical line. I don't know what there is about that for me, but there is I like finding those kinds of, it's like balance within motion. Like I said earlier, a lot of the underpainting is about motion. A lot of the scribbling with pencil and that sort of thing is about kind of motion underneath, swirling kind of motion. I'll sometimes even, I think I do it later in this one, sometimes even draw an arced arrow or draw in other sort of circular forms to suggest kind of rotating motion. I decided I wanted a really big pop of color. This is just dollar store neon paper sheets. I think it's for making origami, but I really love the occasional pop of just a color that the brain can't quite comprehend. It's just like it certainly in this case you can see that even I'm just shooting this with my phone. The phone camera is like, it doesn't ever quite know what to do with an orange that bright, or kind of like a luminous. They're often called like a luminous red, luminous orange, but so in this case, I just wanted, using the same kind of circular form I've already done here. I wanted this really strong pop of color, and I'll cut those out again with scissors. Talking tool wise, I'm using like some not very good scissors, but they're fine for what I'm using them for. But I won't be giving any scissor recommendations or anything like that. So far, I think the only things I've recommended are the fairly inexpensive Amsterdam acrylics that I use. I do think they're quite nice, and I really quite like. I didn't use any in this case, but I really like the Holbein acrylic gouache that I've used in a bunch of the other drawings. They're just pigment wise and for my application, they're really nice to work with. Just very strong colors right out of the tube, and I'm always working out of the tube. The mixing that happens is the mixing that occurs when I mush things around with palette knives and that sort of thing. So I now applied that one little kind of receipt form. You can see kind of intentionally if it does have bits of text on it and has a bit of like handwriting on it. I placed it upside down because I actually didn't want, and I had previously when I cut it, I had cut off the actual receipt, like the printed text on the receipt. I kind of cut that across horizontally. Because I didn't want that text to have any real prominence. I'm probably going to be writing some text on here, and sometimes if I put down collage materials that already have text or already have letter forms, or like I'm doing right now that have number forms, I should talk a little bit about that. So it's the little bingo thing there is actually a fairly thick piece of cardboard, and so I put the glue stick on there. It's not really doing the job because it's too thick. You can see it's just peeling off. And I was actually crumpling it up for two reasons. One, because that will, I'm trying in vain to get it to stick, but I'm going to give up in a second here. But the crumpling, one kind of gives it a bit more surface, softens it up a little bit, so it's not such a static chunk of cardboard on there, and it makes it a little bit easier to apply. But it also, because that's got a printed ink surface, I actually kind of stole this technique from Gayla, who often works with old magazine pages, and when you crumple up those pages, the ink surface cracks, and you get these little kind of fissures, and you get the paper coming through. I opened up the good old acrylic medium here, because that'll do a better job of this kind of needed a thicker kind of paste to actually apply it, this chunky piece of cardboard. But yeah, this also, so in this case, the number forms are interesting. I was meaning to talk a little bit about applying text, which I'll do a bit later in this, but number forms are interesting because just like text, I think no matter what the number, because numbers and letters are such a part of our daily lives, and they are used for, they're our way of communicating data, our way of communicating, in the case of letters and words, obviously everything from emotion to knowledge to just raw data sort of stuff. But so even having numbers down, there's something where there's an implied meaning, I think, just from numbers. Like I think the sense mine goes to places like, oh, are those dates? Am I supposed to, do these numbers have meaning? Am I supposed to look at them relative to other things on the page, sort of thing? So to me, they're just interesting in that way. I was having a bit of a conversation earlier today, actually, with a friend of mine at work, and we were talking. He's been writing poetry, and so we were talking a little bit about poetry. I was saying how I don't think of it so literally this way, but I do think in hindsight, I guess, that the when I'm working with words in these drawings, it is a bit of a form of like a concrete poem where there's both the word is important and the form of the word, the placement of the word, the shape of the word is also important. I mean, that's true of all kind of written or printed language. That it's like the reason you choose one typeface or over another is not always legibility. Obviously, it's very often to ascribe meaning, to ascribe feeling, and so anyway, I think of the once I get to writing some words on here, I'll get into it a little bit more, but I do think of that there's a type of visual poetry that happens in the making of these things. I think I've now almost got this wily piece of cardboard on there. I may next time, if I reach for these same sorts of numbers, what I may try and do is peel the layers of cardboard back a little bit, because that was maybe more of a struggle than it needed to be to get that stuck down. But it will end up giving this page a little extra level of dimension, because obviously you're looking straight down, so you can't see what that card looks like. But it's it's not millimeters high or anything like that, but it's significantly thicker than all the other paper. Okay, here I am inscribing a few more scribbles here and there, but I'm kind of following the forms of the blue and then sort of repeating them. By that I mean that by the forms of it, it's sort of the cascading kind of feeling of that. I also tend to like to put, when I put down collage papers like this, I don't want them to feel entirely like they're just sitting on top of things, and so I want the lines in pencil, especially, even though they're often very faint, are the purpose of them is quite often to place the paper and the painted surface in the same level, I guess. All right, So now I've got a lot on this page now. So, this is one of those times where I could say that this, I have probably in many times before this point said, this is done. Maybe I shouldn't say many times, because I have a tendency to overdo. I have a tendency to go just a little bit further than I should have sometimes. But I knew in this case, because I wasn't thinking about particular words, but I knew that I did want to write some words on here. So actually, what I'm also doing off camera is just looking at some source material. I've talked about this in other videos, but if I'm thinking about text, just thinking about wanting to place words down, um, what I do a lot of the time is go to some sort of not exactly random source material, but not a book where where I know necessarily the text I'm going to get. But a lot of times they are kids' knowledge books. Sometimes they're technical manuals for things like the book I'm actually looking through off camera. I guess I should have shown myself flipping through it, because this makes for a bit of a dull visual. But the book I'm looking through off camera was more of a technical kind of book, and I wasn't finding what I wanted. So I actually pulled out this other one here, which is falling apart. This is like an aeronautics. I forget where we got this, probably the old junk shop, but this is like an aeronautics engine repair, like engine mechanic kind of manual. So it's interesting. It's all typewritten, and a lot of the diagrams are typewritten. But the first thing I've chosen here, even though I went sort of looking for text, the cover of this thing was just this really nice, obviously used to be red and has gone this actually quite nice pink color over time. So it's making its way onto the page as a bit of another collage element here, even though I had thought before that point that I was done with the collage elements. But I don't know, sometimes a scrap of weird mountain-looking paper will call to you. Funny again how this ends up being this kind of mountain shape, and I placed it where I did fairly intentionally, because below it also has that kind of reverse or reflected mountain shape. So I've kind of created in that area there to me, not literal. It's still very abstracted, but there is a landscape that's been formed right there. But I also felt in doing that I had, and I almost regretted it immediately, because now the pink form and that kind of red pink new form I put in also to me looked like a nose and a mouth. And I guess I have the green dot to the side, or you can even kind of look above that. There's almost like, speaking of, I mentioned like pareidolia earlier, so my mind sees a face there in that upper, kind of that upper third of the page. Actually, now that I'm looking, I actually see another face down below. You could probably just, it's the thing with our brains, we're trained really as part of our kind of human survival system and community-minded brain to look for faces, and so it's just a natural thing that happens. Yeah, it turns out in this case that so once I did that, I really had thought before this point, I was kind of meaning, okay, maybe I'll do some text and then I'll be done. That turns out that was not true. So I'll actually still be working on this one for a bit longer. Anyway, like I say, I've got this book off to the side, and it's a really quite visually. I haven't actually pulled any of the pages out of this book for collage materials, but you can see there's some very nice stuff in here. This was, not an actual a printed book in the fact that it has been duplicated, but all the text has been typewritten, and you can tell that all these diagrams were hand drawn and then typed over top of, which I I love that aesthetic. I've got a few books that are like that, where essentially just made with the materials that were available. Like someone needed to make a manual, and they had a typewriter, and obviously this is probably like a made on a mimeograph or something like that, or maybe something a bit fancier than a mimeograph. It is quite black, but maybe like an older photocopy, like toner system. Sorry, too much talking, so I'm getting dry throat. Okay, first word here, and you can see it's taken directly from the page that I've opened to, and even the form of battery with I flipped the poles, but a positive and negative end to this kind of form. So it kind of turns that shape, that kind of orange yellow ombre shape there, into kind of literally makes that, oh, this is a battery now. Related also to talking with my friend earlier today, that he was mentioning that he finds that in the language I choose for my drawings, there's a, what was it? He used the word genre, actually. There's sort of a type of word that I'll use more often than not. And I think that's true. I don't, despite the words often coming from lots of different source materials, there's a lot of them are I guess what I said back to him is like, a lot of them are technical words, but then in association with both the drawing and then possibly other words that I put on the page, they can have an emotional reading to them, or they can be applied to some sort of different association or some sort of different sense. So in this case, it's like a battery is a battery, but a battery is like a warehouse for power. It's a way of storing and then supplying power to things. And so I'm not thinking that specifically when I'm drawing these things. So to me, it was just like I went on that sort of search for a word in a few books off to the side, and then it was the way in which, that particular page, I just loved the visual from that page I was just showing, and then it just the word battery felt like a good word. makes probably very little sense when expressed that way. There aren't really good words, bad words in this context, but there is something about a word that has I don't know, I don't know how to phrase this exactly without it being. I mean, the dumb reference I come up with that pops into my head right now anyway is there's in and I'm sure it's from somewhere else, but I can't remember the source. In the movie Donnie Darko, there's that thing about the sound of the phrase cellar door, and how I hope I have this right, and how that is like the most beautiful phrase in the English language or something like that. Maybe I have this totally wrong. It's been a long time since I saw that movie, but anyway, I bring that up mostly to say that some words, even without much other language context around them, can have interesting sort of, their sound can be interesting, and in this case, there's no without me actually saying the word battery, the sound of that word, with someone just seeing this drawing, they may read the word in their head to a degree. It's not like not everyone's going to sound out that word in their head necessarily, but anyway, the sound is kind of implied without being available. I don't know. That's obviously kind of an unfinished thought, because I think like I've said in previous videos, words have always had an importance to me, and I've always been interested in words. Maybe I haven't said this too specifically, but I quite love one of my hobbies, I guess you could say, is not really a hobby, but I look on Wikipedia for lots of things, and part of that is often, like, one of the things I enjoy a lot of the time is if it's a new word to me that I'm looking up, and obviously there's all the parts of looking up a new word. I know, what does it mean, and but part of it is often where it comes from, and the kind of root of the word, and like how it's formed from language. In my case, kind of the Western, kind of mostly kind of Latin-based Romance kind of languages. Is I only speak and understand English, except for a very kind of baby level smattering of other languages. But anyway, all that to say, I've always had a fascination with words, their meanings, and kind of roots for things. And that's part of often using words in these contexts, is that they, in the context of these drawings, I should say, is that they can have their meaning, and then they can also kind of extend into meaning more than just that meaning. So while I've been talking about words, I've started kind of I applied these kind of grid forms in what were previously the less weighty sections. I talked earlier about kind of weight at the top right, lower left, kind of the way of those white areas. So the grid forms kind of went in the space in between, and they've also kind of created. They've kind of visualized the structure around those circles. That the circles, even though they're, like I said, they're not measured, and also you can tell I did not measure. This is not a clean grid. This is not a grid that is true, but it is kind of it is marking out the underlying structure of where I kind of eyeballed and placed the circles. And again, I've had a recurring thing recently of using the semicircle as well, as an extra level of, I don't, there we go, just wet on wet again. I just scraped off the top of my little red mountain. It's all fine now. I've talked a little bit about the circles before, I guess, like that thought about the sound of words. The circles to me are that it's a visual form that's just pleasing, more so than not that I've never drawn with these, but more so than like a triangular form or something like that. That they're I don't know. I can't quite get at what I mean to say, but circles are just meaningful for me for whatever reason. So then this text here is still actually informed by that same manual that I had out. I just, I think it was on a different page than what I looked at earlier, but, and this is, I write end view here, and then I forget if I do it now or at some point a bit later, I write side view elsewhere. Um, and I point that out just to say that there are a few times where the the letter forms or even the drawing forms are maybe in a little bit of a didactic way. They are pointing out other things. Like that's my use of arrows is like that. So that the arrow, which is pointing at or directing the eye towards something or away from something. Um, I found this interesting, like end view, side view. While it doesn't really tell you anything specific in this case, it makes you think of a physical form that you're looking at something from different viewpoints. And it's the interesting thing about working in abstraction is that, like I was talking earlier about 2D-ness, 3D flatness versus kind of dimensionality, like collage versus assemblage. Um, there's something about working this way where you get to have a little bit of both because um, you can kind of reference dimensions, you can reference depth and volume and that sort of thing visually without actually having it, and without being representational about it. Yeah, I'm not sure where I'm at. That's I talk over these things quite a bit in the way that I draw them. In that I don't plan what I'm going to say for these videos because I'm actually this is just me real time. I'm watching the video on a monitor and recording the audio live, no edits, just to get a sense of. I ascribed that kind of tiny grid in that little box. Decided I really did not like the little tiny grid, and the Stabilo the all it's a water soluble, so I'm actually able to like remove most of that and but actually still have, so now I've got like a sense of a grid, but I've gotten back down to this kind of now smudged box, which actually uh, sort of like, but I wasn't sure about it still. At the time it felt a almost like a mistake, and that's actually part of what I'm doing here, like reinforcing these lines. Part of that is because I just smudged them out, but it's almost like to direct my attention back to that box and see where I might want to go. And so the next thing I do here is like seeing if I can, because I don't know, for whatever reason I wanted to put a grid inside that grid. I guess I understand the reason that this whole thing is kind of like shapes within shapes, grids within grids. And so I when I drew the grid inside, which was very rough and haphazard, it just didn't do what I wanted to do, and that's why I sort of smudged it out. So now I'm experimenting with like, can I take this literal piece of graph paper and place it into that shape. But then now I'm like, well, maybe not, but where else could it go? You can tell, I can actually sort of stick things down there because things are still a little bit tacky. Most of the paint at this point has dried in the background there, but there's a bit of tackiness. So out comes the purple glue stick again here, and then I think I've now found a spot here where I actually quite like the even though this wasn't where I was intending to put this kind of grid in the grid, I think it actually works better. Well, I glue this off, and it's so I'll say in this case that I began to think of this. I'll eventually go through all of the drawings in this ledger a bit more closely, but in one of the videos I posted already, where I went through quite quickly, I talked about the fact that I've done a bunch of drawings that I refer to as machines, and not that they're literally. Some of them do literally look a bit mechanical or electronic or that sort of thing, and there was a sense, I guess, from this one. Maybe it's because I started, like, as soon as I drew that battery form there, there was something about it that that battery is now sort of powering the rest of the elements on the page. Don't mean that to even sound like it could possibly make sense, but that's the that's sort of the to go back to that thought, that's sort of the concrete poetry of this drawing is that the battery through the grid form kind of connects to everything else on the page, and that each of the other forms can stand on their own. You could see this almost like a patchwork of little screens or something like that, like each of these grid squares kind of showing you something, or get semi-literal and think of them as like this is like an integrated circuit or something like that. Or I swear a lot of what I end up thinking about is still, I've actually got one up here on the wall in the room beside me here. I've got this, it's a Radio Shack 115-1 electronic kit, and maybe I'll even just make a video about that one day, because it's just a fascinating visual object. But essentially it was like a kid's version of making very quick electronic projects. It has this whole array of springs, and all the springs are essentially attached to resistors and diodes, transistors, display sources, batteries, all these lights, knobs, that sort of thing. And the idea was that you could use it to create 150, probably more, 150 different electronic tools. One of them is like you could make a radio. It actually has a little radio tuner thing built into it. You could make sound makers, or it's got some light emitting things. It's got a light sensor. It has all sorts of things. I really should just make a video about it, because it's I swear a lot of these drawings, and probably even a lot of my not worldview exactly, but my artistic view comes from the form of that thing and working with it. A lot of my work habits maybe even come from it. All right, so we're almost here at the end, and so like I was talking about, I ended up calling this one, you'll see here in a moment, it's called Machine for Smiling, which it sounds kind of creepy and ominous, maybe like some sort of like something has to force you to smile or something. But honestly, I did this in a way that wasn't. Wasn't feeling bad about anything when I made this, and so there's no sense of, it's not a depressive statement or anything like that. But I just kind of like that title for this kind of form. All right, well, thanks everyone.